Hello, welcome back to the JRB podcast with myself, Ryan Levine, joined here by Jeff Jones and Bohdan Temnick.
Hello.
Hey,
And today we're going to be talking about not like any specific, really like Yu-Gi-Oh like developments or the meta or anything like that. Uh,
Yeah, because you want to talk about fighter anymore.
yeah, with
Not me.
everyone kind of expecting a Forbidden and Limited list soon, we don't want to talk about specific Forbidden and Limited list changes. What I want to talk about actually is how Yu-Gi-Oh handles that thing in general, that is banning cards and errata in cards. And I guess I'll put it in the envelope of like rebalancing the game compared to how many other games do it. And Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty unique in how it does it, and I've always known that, but it wasn't until the last like year or two that I've played a bunch of other different games and seen how they do it firsthand that I've really felt any sort of opinions about how it's done. And I know we, the three of us, have discussed it a little bit over the past couple days, and that's what we're going to go over. So for those of you that have no idea what I'm about to talk about, Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty unique in that it does not have a format rotation, which for that is most other games. I'm going to say almost every other game, like Pokemon, Magic, like actually almost every other game that has lasted a long amount of time. After a certain amount of time, cards will rotate out of the format. You will no longer be able to use them once a product has aged a certain amount of time. It's different from game to game and different circumstances. Like I know Pokemon adjusted how their rotation worked over COVID because you couldn't play with your cards for some amount of time, so they didn't have tournaments and they extended some sets to be legal longer. And then when a set rotates out, it is then part of like a legacy or retro format, similar to kind of how Yu-Gi-Oh has a traditional format. Technically, like there aren't any tournaments for it really, but technically on the website, traditional format Yu-Gi-Oh exists, sort of. Like on paper it exists, in practice it doesn't really. Like I've never actually played a traditional format tournament, and I can't think of any place that have ever actually held one in person. But yeah, for the other games, there usually are tournaments for those formats. So I've not played Magic much, but they have many different formats. There's Vintage, which I think includes every card with a ban list. Like there is a ban list because there are some cards that are even too, they decided were too much for that format. Oh, and also a lot of these games do have a Yu-Gi-Oh style Forbidden and Limited or ban list in addition to a rotation.
Yeah.
The bans are just way less frequent. Like for Yu-Gi-Oh we expect like 20 cards to get banned like every 3 months because every card ever is legal, and there are these crazy interactions that are possible because you're using cards from however long ago. But most of these other games, the bans are few and far between, especially for the older formats. But yeah, so what really got me on this is I started playing Universes last year, as I've talked about a couple times on this. And when the most recent set came out in February, they rotated out set 1 of the My Hero set. And it got me thinking about how other games have handled it. I've played Hearthstone in the past, and Hearthstone ever since I believe 2017, maybe 2016. I don't remember exactly, 2016 or 2017. They've been on a 2-year standard format rotation where the first set of a year rotates out all sets over 2 years old, and it creates these times where sometimes there will be only 4 sets legal in the standard format, and sometimes there will be 6 sets legal in the standard format. So you get kind of naturally fluctuating power levels and different things that are going on. And I feel like and that is it lets like the power curve of these games kind of fluctuate as they want. And I think that's maybe the biggest difference. The power curve for all these games generally does trend upwards because people like eventually people will print stronger cards. But for Yu-Gi-Oh, I think the power curve is almost just like linearly upwards with very few exceptions. But also, Jeff, you have designed your own game, Argent Saga. I don't know how much of it you can talk about as far as plans for what never got made, but Did you have a? Were you intending on doing a format rotation? Were you intending on doing a ban list? Were you intending on
It
errating
was
cards? Like how what was your plan going to be?
it was both. So there
Hmm.
would always be a ban list. I think every game needs to have every traditional physical card game. If you're doing online, you don't really need a ban list. You can just literally change cards whenever you want.
Hmm.
But yeah, ban list and then also rotation, which would have been um, uh, every year would be a block of four sets. So I was also doing like lore and a story. So like the first year would be four sets. That's one story. The next year would be four sets, and that's another story. And whenever the eighth set came out, the very first set would have cycled out. So it would have been, well, when the eighth set dropped, the set one would have dropped, and then when set nine dropped, then the next set would have dropped. So set two, and it would have kept going like that. So every
Okay.
time a new set comes out, the
Previous
most
7 sets would be legal, and then anything beyond that would be
right,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think how UFS used to do it back is it used to be I think the last 10 sets were legal. So whenever a set came out, it would rotate the 10th ago set or whatever, however you would say that. And then now they're doing it like sort of like Hearthstone does with a yearly rotation. But Bohdan, I know when I was asking you about the Pokemon thing, could you give me a little bit more information about what happened with like when the Pokemon block got extended because of COVID or something?
Uh, I very vaguely like played Pokemon
Hmm.
during that period. Slash, my friends play it, and the way it was explained to me was just like with no competitive play, they extended the block. And I
Mm.
think they have it on the cards that get released, like cards in certain blocks are now marked with like certain letters, and then when rotation happens in X period of time, like cards with other letters are no longer like legal for play.
Hmm.
And then the standard stuff for Pokemon where they just have like all generic staples be in constant production pretty much. So like rotation means something, but not to the same extent I think as some other game. Well, like I think Pokemon does rotation correctly, right? I think
Mm.
that's like
I guess
as correct as you can do
before
it.
we
I
get
have
into
improvement
what you mean by
rotation.
correctly, I guess I want to establish some like because I do agree. I think I like how they do it, but I think let's take it one step back and talk about pros and cons of it, and then I want you to talk
Mm.
about what you think of
Yeah,
it.
go
So,
for it, go for
so
it.
we've most people listening and us have played Yu-Gi-Oh as our primary game for most of our time playing it for most of our lives and time playing games, and more recently we've branched out to doing more different games to get different perspectives and whatever. But um, I would say the pro of what Yu-Gi-Oh does with not having a rotation is your cards are always legal, right? And them being always legal doesn't always mean they're viable. Like the fact that I can play, Magic Cylinder doesn't mean anything because that card is so far beyond power corrupt. It's irrelevant to the point that there's an above zero chance some people listening don't know what that card is. A card that was extremely popular and even limited and got 20 years ago, and here we are. It's just so irrelevant that it doesn't even matter anymore. And then on the and then it also means that when designing cards, they have to think about this constant force of, okay, well, unless we ban these cards, we will have to design around Ash Blossom, Nibiru, Effect Veiler, forever. Maxi, which
Maxi.
eventually it is now banned in our region, but in Japan and the Asia regions, it is not banned. And they design with that card in mind, maybe or don't. Who knows? Like truly, who knows how much of these decisions are made by which people. But um, when you're always having to keep in mind of tens of thousands of potential interactions because we have over 11,000 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh now. A lot of them are, some amount of them are vanilla monsters, but there are a lot of cards that do a lot of different things and a lot of different interactions. And we see from time to time crazy, crazy, crazy interactions show up with cards that are older because of new cards that, like, in the defense of, R&D, there is no way they could have seen. Like, I'm going to say when they, like, the most recent one that I can think of would be the not even the Phoenician cluster one. The Phoenician cluster FTKs that were popular in Japan in like 2017 and 2018. That's not even the one. The Samsara Lotus FTK, which is Samsara Lotus
Oh.
is banned here. The Samsara Lotus FTK with Trickstar, Black Cat Bat, and Bomber, like this one is so weird that there are, again, people might not even know what I'm talking about. There's a weird setup. If you read Samsara Lotus, it is on the ban list. Just know that it was used with Trickstar Black Cat back to do an FTK. No one ever talked with it, to the best of my knowledge.
Only enabled by Firewall, or am I
no, it was a Bomber Dragon. I believe the setup was Bomber Dragon.
Oh yeah, no, you're right.
Topologic Bomber Dragon. I think Nightmare Cerberus. So your Link monsters didn't get destroyed.
Link it to make sure it can't die, and then you have the Black Cat.
And it's one of those things where, you know what? All of those cards are. I even Topologic Bomber Dragon, even though that card was involved in some FTKs, that card did see play as like its intent. It just a big monster that destroyed cards, and like that card is like fine. And I think it was a cool design card, and I liked a lot of the other cards around it. And like that's the type of thing. And the downside of not rotating cards is like you make this really cool card, Topologic Bomber Dragon, that saw play for like 2 years and saw like niche usage in these decks, and then it's like, oh, you accidentally invented 11 FTKs by any monster that can continuously summon itself because of this, whatever. And you could argue, well, Bomber could have been once per turn. I would argue that defeats the point of the card, because the point of it was supposed to be a downside to you too, whatever. But when you have these cards that were legal 15 years ago and oops, accidentally created an FTK, like that's the downside of never rotating cards, right? Is that these FTKs, these types of insane things can come up, and it's not realistic for anyone designing the cards to have foreseen that, right? Like that one is crazy. The Samsara Lotus Black Cat back one, like that one is insane. So that's, I think, like the lowest point of not rotating cards. And then the low point of rotating cards is obviously people who have played your game and buy your cards can't use their cards anymore, or they can only use their cards in certain formats, and maybe not the format they prefer to play, or whatever. And then something that some games do, like Pokemon does it, and I think and Magic does it, is sometimes they will reprint older cards back, and they will reintroduce them back into the standard format, and then usually you are allowed to use your older printings of those cards. That's generally, I don't know of a game where you're not allowed to use the original printings. I'm sure some crazy obscure game exists where they made you buy the cards you already owned again. Speed Duel. Okay,
well,
sorry.
The fact that you cannot figure out what game that is.
Yeah,
it probably doesn't.
It probably doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, but But as you were talking about, I want to talk about when you say Pokemon does rotation better. I would like you to elaborate on that, if you don't mind. Or they do it well. I guess you mean.
I think there's a lot of fatigue when it comes to like the Pokemon product schedule, similar to Magic, right? You see a lot of sentiments on Twitter with people saying there's so many products coming out, why do I buy this? Like, what, like I can't get the, this product this time because I had to buy, a case of product last time. No, you didn't. Anyway, on that, like, the reason why I think they're doing it so well is because of that, and the reason why they're doing that is because they have rotation, so you have a constant flow of these cards readily available in your rotated format. Like, that should be like a no-brainer, I guess. I don't know if there's like a more efficient way to do it, but yeah, it's just like introducing new people to a rotated format. I think you do need that constant influx of like product on the shelves that has, all of these cards like readily available. And when you get into rotation without putting these like generic-ish staples into like your core sets, then you have like these other like problems on top of it. I don't know. I think Pokemon does like quite well with like their product schedule to compensate for the downfall of like rotation, where you can have this like not necessarily like fatigue, but sort of the word escapes me. It'll come back to me at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then Magic is more of like they try and do like 4 different things at once, whether it be like collect a booster, draft. Otherwise, there's like 30 different formats. And then I feel like they do maybe have some neglect when it comes to their their rotating formats for like, you know, stuff like modern or whatever. But yeah, that's a different can of worms entirely. Maybe Jeff want to touch on like random R&D related stuff when it comes to rotation. It's probably more relevant for something like Magic that has so many other different formats. But...
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as I was saying the other day to these guys that I think for a successful rotation, and you need to be designing with rotation in mind, and it's very hard to start implementing it after your game is already kind of moved its way forward. Like I would think it's very hard for Yu-Gi-Oh to start a rotation right now, in my opinion. But I guess I could be wrong, and I'm not thinking about it the right way. But all the rotations that I've seen, in as far as games go, they all, but as soon as they start designing a set, they are designing that with this is going to be part of rotation, or like because like sometimes like you like when you're designing something, you have to take in mind that when this releases, X thing is not going to be legal anymore. Is that relevant to what we are designing? So like if you're like in a Pokemon, if you're designing a new good fighter card, right? If you were, or like even a fighter, or like maybe dark, something like that. One of the best decks right now is Charizard, and so if you're designing a fighter card, you might first think, oh, like we can't make this card very good because the Charizard deck is good, like really good.
It'll be even better, yeah. Like the Terra Dark Charizard deck is really good. So if we make
Right.
random Dark Fire support, will it be
Or,
too
So
good?
like
what is it like the mirror Idon deck, right? That's the one that has that crazy it's like a crazy trainer that just like hits the top 5 and peels energies,
yeah,
right?
the electric charger.
Yeah.
But so like when you have to think about, all right, so when I'm designing this, is this going to affect the current meta when it releases, or is something going to be like cycled out? So like you can make this card more powerful if the Charizard deck is going to be weaker by then because of rotation, but if it's not, then you have to hold yourself back or whatnot. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, so it's like you compensate for some like maybe some like sorry, it's very early in the morning and I cannot think of the word. So like the things that you like neglect in the design process can be compensated for with rotation, but then at the same time things that you maybe did track in the design process, you might be more limited by rotation as well, right? Like it'll go both ways, so you need to find a nice mid ground is sort of what I think Jeff was going. It's like you need to be in both avenues of, if I print this card and it is good for this thing and then rotation is happening, like will it still be good for this thing, or will it be bad for this thing? Like if this is still around, like maybe we hold off on a product cycle to release this card as well.
Yeah,
given
but
rotation, right?
yeah, you also kind of have to like keep track of like how long your card is going to be good for. Like if we release this card, we know it's going to be good for at least this many months or years, right? And I think that also comes into play when designing future cards, because if you're designing a really strong card and you're like, all right, this card is going to be around for, you know, 12 months, and that means you can't, if you were to print anything else that's like also as good, you have to be like kind of leery of that. I think it's kind of weird in the design process when you're like printing like really strong cards or want to print a really strong card, because it means you don't really want to print more strong cards to go in that same block, or else you get kind of crazy like Yu-Gi-Oh does, whereas all the strong cards are legal at the same time. I don't know. I might be rambling, but that's just
No,
kind of how I feel
I
right
think
now.
I think what you're trying to get at is like usually when set, or when cards or sets rotate out and then you can reprint them later, like Pokemon does and like Magic does, and put some, and sort of a Hearthstone does, which Hearthstone's a unique thing that I want to talk about a little bit in a second. But you, from a design standpoint, you can kind of choose or tweak the power level of the game as a whole, right? And when this strong card and this strong interaction is leaving the game, so the power level of the game will go down a little bit, I can introduce a pretty good card that will adjust the power level up a little bit, but maybe if all of them were legal at the same time, the power level is too high and everything is too consistent, everything is too powerful. And we like, it's kind of like, again, it's kind of weird to apply any of this to Yu-Gi-Oh because any card could just be banned or not banned at any point in time. So like the power level, or like the power curve for Yu-Gi-Oh is determined pretty much, like, I would say Yu-Gi-Oh's power level is at its weakest in like the day after a ban list, almost every time. A ban list almost always makes the power level of the game lower. I can't think of a time when cards getting unbanned increased the power level of the game more than, the cards getting banned decreased it. And then the power level of the game doesn't really increase again until a new product comes out. I would say the little
So
pocket we had.
I think there might be
Mhm,
a time that it did happen,
yeah,
and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
sure.
but it was the first Kashtira ban list when we all thought Kashtira wasn't going
Mm,
to be very good. But what happened
ooh.
was Kashtira was not very good, but every deck was so much worse that it did not matter.
Right. Well, I would say that wouldn't necessarily be the power level of the game, but it definitely, like, I will agree with you that that's interesting. That's an interesting point where the for YCS Philly, the power level of the game was really high. We just got Pearly, we just got Super Heavy Samurai. Kashtira was at absolute full power, and we had that event. Then every deck got hit, and we then tried to evaluate everything compared to the previous format, and we were like, well, every deck is really bad now, whatever. And it turned out that, yeah, as you said, Kashtira was way worse than it was, but Kashtira went down like, 5 notches in power, but every other deck down went, every other deck went 100 notches down in power. So Kashtira was still way stronger than everything else, to the point that arguably relative to the field, Kashtira was even better. There's an argument to be made for that. um but yeah, I will, which I'm not sure I would consider that the power level of the game in general, but maybe it is, because if one deck is so much better than everything else, then I guess that is kind of the power curve of the game. But the specific one I was thinking of recently is the ban list right at the beginning of this year, right after we saw Rescue Ace win YCS Indianapolis and Unchained win YCS Richmond. We got a list that limited Airlifter and limited whatever the Unchained monster was. Basically, the
Shavara.
yeah,
Is
Shavara.
Airlifter limited or semi-limited?
It's limited. It's
Okay,
limited.
I think
In
is
in,
it
in Japan,
semi-limited in
it's
Japan?
semi-limited. Yes,
Okay,
yes, it's
okay.
yes. Here it is at 1. Yeah, and for that little pocket, we didn't have any products come out in like January, or and for that little 2 to 3 month pocket where we just had some regionals, we were waiting for Maze of Memories, and we're waiting for Phantom Nightmare. The power level of the game was pretty low relative to what it had been in recent years, because there was a unique situation where we had a list that hit the best decks, and there were no new products for a pretty long amount of time, for like for 2 or 3 months. So we were at a point in Yu-Gi-Oh where the power level was pretty low. There were no major events during that point either, which was kind of weird. But so all the regional results from that little pocket of time, I think, are kind of fascinating, because it was like a form. It's not a format that we get often, where we get a ban list and then no products for a couple months. So everybody is kind of just doing whatever, because usually I would say the metagame and the power level is pretty dictated by the products that come out in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that was just an odd point where it really wasn't. But I would say the power level of the game after Phantom Nightmare is now extremely high, right? Because every single thing is legal all at once, and it looks like it will stay that way for a little while longer. But we'll see how that shakes up. But I think,
Well, that's also like
Mhm.
that goes back to the stuff that we would talk about before, where it's like, yeah, no, everything is just too far gone if you really microanalyze everything. Like what happened with it was the same sort of sentiment with stuff like Mystic Mind, where it's like, even with the pocketed formats, like it took Mystic Mind not doing anything to get banned, but like in the pocket where Mystic Mind was probably just absurd and egregious to be legal, like it was just still legal. and it would keep rolling. And it's sort of where we're at now, where it's like gimmick puppets shouldn't be legal, or like equivalent cards, right? Like
Yeah.
Albion Sanctifier shouldn't be legal, but like it is.
Mhm.
But at the current point in time, we have to look at the Snake Eye cards. And then when that happens, it's like, do we roll back to the Sanctifier stuff again? You know what I mean? Like there'll be layers to it. So yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said, and hide mine in public, something, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So Jeff mentioned something about the differences between a physical card game and a printed card game a little while ago, and I kind of want to expand on that. So something that digital card games, and I mean some physical card games have done this too, is instead of banning cards and instead of having a rotation or anything, they will errata cards, and not in the Yu-Gi-Oh sense where when a card gets errataed in Yu-Gi-Oh, it very, very, very rarely is like a slight change. It is almost always an entirely functionally different card. To the point that back when we had our first big round of erratas in 2015, with Crush Card Virus and Ring of Destruction, everything from Premium Gold
It was Sinister Serpent too, right?
2. I think it was Premium Gold
it
2.
was.
Yeah, Sinister Serpent,
Yeah.
Temple of the Kings. If you played an old copy of those cards, per Konami policy at the time, this is no longer the case, but at the time, you had to have a written they were treated as foreign cards. You had to have a written updated text or a copy of the updated text. So if you played a copy of Crush Card Virus from Turbo Pack 1, whatever Turbo Pack it was from, and
it was Turbo Pack 1,
yeah,
yes.
and you had to have a written, like the new effect, like written out as if you were playing a foreign card, because they were so different. That's no longer the case now that we have Neuron and everyone has a phone. I guess it doesn't matter anymore. You can just do whatever.
I don't know if you read Twitter right now after that Neuron announcement.
You're right. Maybe not everybody has Neuron.
To believe that some people don't have a phone. Anyway, that's a different topic.
You would believe that some people don't have a phone, some people don't have Neuron. But yeah, that's no longer the case. And in a print card game, it's tough. So for erratas, for a print card game, I think that's the only way you can do erratas. They have to be sweeping changes that are very, very different, to the point that when, because it's not just at like a competitive level, at a local level, when you have like an 8-person tournament, I would argue at least like 3 people in your tournament need to be aware that this card changed. Right. And so it needs to be like a huge change that will be publicized so people see it. Like when they unbanned Firewall Dragon, and there was the little asterisk on the bottom of the ban list that said Firewall Dragon will be errataed, and it'll be errataed in this product, and the new text will be this, and everyone was like, oh, okay, sure. But for a digital card game, you can make really small tweaks to cards that are just a little bit too high above the power curve. Like, for example, this is one I've been thinking about my example for this for a few days now. Can you imagine if in 2007 they said, we're errataing Stratos, now it has 1500 attack? Think about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a really small change to the stats of a card, which nowadays Stratos could have 0 attack. It does not matter. That card's not staying on the field for more than 2 seconds. You're summoning it, you're searching, you're linking it away. Who cares?
Actually, if it had 0 attack, there might be other issues.
Right. I'm saying the stat, like the stat line of Stratos in the modern game does not matter. In 2007, Stratos was good partly because it had a high attack stat. It was like a gadget but more efficient because it was also had high stats. And I think it would be very interesting to go back to a bunch of these times, and think about how would these cards get changed slightly to be more balanced? If we could retool them slightly. Like, as funny as this is, what if they went back and they made Terratop a level 4 monster instead of level 3? Or they made Tomborg a level 4 monster. Like, how, just these random things where they go, we don't want Terratop to be a 1-card rank 3 without a normal summon. We're going to make Tomborg level 2. Okay. That's but then and then the barrier for that is how do you make, like, you can't do all these changes all the time, because every time, if you have a ton of these little erratas, what is the point of having physical cards, right? And then your players will be confused because their cards don't do what they actually say. And then, like, it's just not fun to keep track of a million different things, especially for casual players. For a digital card game, when there is no physical item you're holding and it's all just on your screen, you can change the text and the stats of a card to be whatever you want. And that's something that I think Hearthstone has done quite well over the years. Is they will in a very, very small amount of cases, they have ban cards. It's like very small. Like, I'd say in 10 years they've done it like 3 times. Where cards have just been so insane, and they've needed time to completely retool them. But they have errated cards a lot. That's their main thing. Is they will look at a deck and they'll be, this deck's a little bit too good. We're gonna make this card cost 1 more mana. We're gonna make this card have 1 less attack. We're gonna make this card have 1 less health. Something like that, to make it easier to kill, to make it less aggressive, to make it slower, something. And that is their main tool of. In addition to the rotation, is they will do that quite frequently, which, like, assuming accessibility reasons aside, would you like more games to do that, or do you just, is it too hard to get over the print? Like, in print you can't do that, but magically, if we could, would you like something like this, or would you rather them just print new cards and ban them and ban old ones?
Yeah, I think Bohdan and I will probably say the same thing, where I would rather a card just be banned, and if you really want something similar, just print a new card to do what you actually want it to do after learning your mistake.
It's very, like, it's just unfriendly to new players as well. It's just another semi gatekeeping, like, learning curve you have to have, where instead of just like, this card in front of me is this card, it's like, no, this card is actually this card that you have to have access to your phone to know it's this card.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when it gets kind of convoluted, and like that really comes down to like poor design and poor like planning and forethought when it comes to the game itself. I would welcome a change like that in the digital platform more often. I would like to see unique formats on like MTG Arena, Pokemon TCG Online, or otherwise, like, because at the end of the day, they're not the same thing as the real life card game. Make them as unique as possible, and I think Jeff has said this about Master Duel before as well. Like, let's do things we can't do in paper that we've been clamoring for so long, because it's such an easy thing to do. It's it doesn't cost a lot of money for them, so like, if anything, it could help their bottom line. I don't think it'll deter people playing the game unless it's a very drastic change. So yeah,
I would.
I'm all for the original measure
So
for paper.
I'm gonna go a little off topic because you brought this up, and it was
Mm-hmm.
something I was thinking about the other day and didn't say to you guys.
Sure.
But um, there is have you guys heard of the game? Oh God, now I'm not gonna remember the name because I have to think of it. Oh, Shadowverse.
Hmm.
Have either of you heard of it?
Yeah, we open packs in our hotel room at Nats.
Oh yeah, you did. Okay, yeah. So originally started as a digital game, and now the digital game they have a physical game, and now they
Now they
are
have digital game too.
yes, they're coming with like digital
Yeah.
game too, and
I
Yeah.
that
didn't know
made me
that.
think. Yes,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What?
and
Okay.
that made me think of and then also thought of how Dragon Ball has been redone like 20 times and now they have a
Hmm.
digital client. And it made me think of how I always complain that Yu-Gi-Oh is just the same now and they keep reprinting the same cards with like different skins, and I really wish they would just like introduce a new mechanic because every other game gets new mechanics all the time, and I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is just the same I'm playing the same thing every year with just different art on it. And I thought, well, what if instead of, because we talked about, what if Master Duel had like cards that only existed in Master Duel? And I thought, actually, what I think they might do one day, maybe I'm giving too much credit, is to create Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel 2, which is fully digital and is completely separate from the card game. And that's where new mechanics would be released because they can actually do it. So you're
Hmm.
playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and this is where you get the new mechanics. You can do things you could never do in physical game, and introduce a whole new type of game to players. And then also because get to start kind of fresh. You get to learn on all the mistakes you've made over the past 20 years and not remake them, hopefully. And then you can adjust things as needed. Whereas, like, you can't change whatever Ash Blossom or like Max C. You just have to ban it. Like in Master Duel, you can't like errata Max C to something else. You just have to ban it. So, but in this brand new type of game, you could you have full reign to do whatever you want instead of banning cards or not releasing cards at all.
Oh,
You just
okay,
release
okay,
whatever
yeah,
you
yeah.
want and then
You're,
change
you're
it as
adding an
needed.
extra step to where I wanted to be at. So you like if you let's say hypothetically they would introduce Master Duel 2, would you still keep Master Duel 1 around in this like thing? I don't remember if Shadowverse is keeping the other client or if like
No,
this
but we
new
don't even know
Shadowverse is
what the
taking
new
over.
Shadowverse is. They're getting rid of the new
Oh,
one
sure,
and
sure.
making a new, the old one to making a new one. But it made me think of
Okay.
what if they just made a new Master Duel and then you could play Master
Hmm.
Duel, which is similar to the physical TCG, and Master Duel 2, which is, um, you know, a brand new game entirely, which is Yu-Gi-Oh at its core, but you get to do all the things you couldn't do normally in
All right,
the design aspect.
hear me out. Hear me out. I think I have a way to do what you were proposing, and we can do it for current Master Duel and or equivalent game because I think Hearthstone and Arena have integrated the alt formats quite well, and you could literally just have like Yu-Gi-Oh Master Duel and then Yu-Gi-Oh Master Duel TCG as an option, and then that way you'll have a ladder similar to Hearthstone where it's like wild, extended, whatever the buzzword they wanted to use to differentiate the two now. You would have a TCG 1-for-1 simulator, right? Given the whole we had Bonfire Poplar like relatively quickly. Well, maybe not Bonfire. We had Poplar relatively quickly, similar with Promethean Princess in Master Duel. In fact, we
Princess
had
first,
Princess.
actually.
Yeah, we
But
had
yeah,
Princess. Yeah,
that was
in Master Duel
crazy.
before TCG, even, right? Yeah. So like, my goal would just be, you still have Master Duel. You climb into the people that, sorry, you climb into the people that want an official simulator to replicate, TCG format, tournament experience, and otherwise. And that's what Konami wants, right? Like they don't want people playtesting on a third-party sim. So you would have that, and that would cover one base. And then your format for competitive Master Duel would sort of be like where we're at now, but it would be strictly independent of TCG itself. Like the only thing would be like, yes, cards are being pulled from TCG again, similar to where we're at now. Like you don't see Preventer is only just coming out in Master Duel. Like it is coming out in the next set, I believe so. So like, why not just do what you're doing now, but take it a step deeper and do what we're proposing here with like erratas and balancing and just all of those like little things, and use that even as just like your own self-built R&D. Like that is so good, and so many more games will be played, and that's a big thing I think they're sort of like neglecting when it comes to R&D for Yu-Gi-Oh. It's just like, why not use Master Duel as some of your testing, as some of your beta testing or otherwise, putting Princess in the game early and seeing if it does anything without these other Broken Fire cards is really good, because then you get to see the play rate, you get to see if anything becomes ridiculous, and it'll help you when you ban like the actual problem stuff associated with a card like Princess. Like you get to understand, is this card an issue on its own? And like, first glance, like obviously you determine this is a good card, but not really. But without, however many thousand games played on Master Duel before, you even had Snake Eye cards on the platform, like you get to determine if that is the case. Like no one's ever thought of something like that. No, maybe they have, maybe we're not, again, still not giving them enough credit, but think about it, right? Like put the card in Master Duel first. Is that the issue? Yes, no, maybe. It's in TCG now. Like that's more games than Jerome would play on the kitchen table with Kevin
Yes,
or
I
Billy or
guess.
something.
Yes, Master Duel would simulate more games than. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
Well, that's also the thing that we saw with like a lot of the like the OCG stuff converting on like Dueling Book or Dueling Network, right? Where we'd see like Japan would play X, Y, and Z. But again, like once it gets into the realm, and that everyone's doing all their play testing in like a week, like with the amount of games played, people will learn things that R&D just could not even fathom. Just more volume of games is always a good thing, and I think utilizing Master Duel for that that aspect of like R&D, and even the, just having its own format itself, which will lead, why does this exist? And like you can't openly say it's for this reason, right? Like for research and development, because our group is so close knit, or it's so small, or it's so divided between 3 regions. Like you don't have to advertise that now. You can just say this is Master Duel format, and secretly sneak it all in, and then get your homework done for you by the players, by the the million games being played in the span of like a week or something.
Okay.
Think about
Sorry,
it.
I have my mic turned off. Sorry. When I was trying to, yeah, sorry, I'm trying to think of my response combining both what you say and what Jeff said. So I guess first I'll address what Jeff said. I guess I think what you're talking about, I will argue, might just be Duel Links, but when it came out 7 years ago, where Duel Links was a soft reset. Now, for better or for worse, Duel Links is so close to the regular, arguably a higher power level than the regular card game now, because you have these dual skills that do insane nuts things. Like, I believe in one of the recent like KC Cups, there was like a 70% consistent FTK because there was a skill that like added like 8 cards to your extra deck.
Yeah.
Or something outward. Like it was some outrageous skill with just like what? Like what are like you can't design these skills like it's like you're summoning Vorse Raider now. Like we hit like we're just playing like Mech Knights and like real like I don't. I'm actually gonna check what the current Duel Links metagame is. I'm very, very curious. I think it's like the Galaxy deck and like maybe even like Math Mechs. I'm kind of
well, they got
curious.
They got Striker like.
But they got Sky Striker.
Yeah.
They just have Sky Striker. Oh my god, that's crazy. That is hilarious.
The tech Janus deck is pretty good. The Mayakashi, like those decks are all like presentable decks. But then seeing what they have done to fix a lot of this, and looking at the tier lists on Duel Links meta, is very funny to see Blue Eyes as a tier 2 deck now. I wonder if they got a skill or something funny.
Yeah, I mean that's what that is, right? You just make a skill, make any deck you want good. But
no, I think they just got all of these. They just got a bunch of the broken like anime cards in the tin.
Sure, yeah.
Who would have thought that? Yeah, those cards are like
those are like True Light or something.
Cards, they're dumb. It's like Ultimate Fusion, Successor Soul, and like Binger Machine, just like ridiculously consistent like Blue Eyes deck.
Yeah.
In a format that is a lot more limiting with removal and or like climbing up to bigger links, I guess, is probably the reason why it's doing so well. The other thing to note for Duel Links in its current form, not as relevant to this conversation, but something that I talked to people about, I don't know if it was you guys, but I was looking at the World Championship page, and it has Duel Links Rush Duel as a format that
as a separate format.
The World.
Yes,
as a separate format. And so that's interesting to me. This is how they're pushing like Rush Duel in our region, right? Like they are putting it in Duel Links. It's making it a separate format compared to where we were at 2023 Worlds, where like Rush Duel was played between the Korean and the Japanese representative of like Rush Duel, which was essentially like their Dragon Duel equivalent, I believe. So it's like 2 kids playing in the separate room with a lot less fanfare, and they're getting a unique prize card and something like that. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. But at the same time, like, you would be so upset if you're like playing in the finals of Rush Duel thing, and like the opening ceremony of the actual World Championships is happening, and people want to see the announcement for like the Tokyo Dome thing, and just no one's paying attention to your game. That's basically what happened. It was genuinely upsetting. So seeing like that be Rush Duel's integration for like worldwide release, essentially, I think is cool and unique. And that plays on the alternate format thing, right? Like we've seen it. Like you can put Rush Duel in Duel Links and have it be an alt format. Like tangent, mind you. Like I don't know where we were going from here, but I would like to point out that Rush Duel thing specifically because I think it does sort of open up a lot more in the future if this is something they are willing to do and even put it at the World Championship level.
Which I have 2 to 3 things I want to add onto that. But Jeff, did you have something first, or did I?
No. Go
okay,
ahead.
Okay. So first, as far as like the soft reset Mash Duel 2 type thing, or the soft reset of Yu-Gi-Oh in general, I will argue that's been attempted. I guess now I will amend 3 times if we consider Speed Duel and Duel Links to be different things, which I think at this point I will.
Well,
when they first started,
I guess
they were
this is
not.
where I will butt in because
Mhm.
I don't think that's true at all. Like you're trying to create a game that's not for your players. You're trying to create a game that is easy for players,
Mhm.
for new players. You're not actually trying them to get them. You're trying to. It is basically those things were for physical, trying to get people to ease them into Yu-Gi-Oh and then transition them over into the
Okay.
physical card game.
Fair enough.
Whereas
Yeah.
you would just be creating a game that is for your players that already exist, not as a way to ease them into playing Yu-Gi-Oh, but as a new game entirely. And you get to those like when they created new Rush Duel and stuff, they didn't create cards that you couldn't do things normally. They just do things that card
It's a
games
different
do.
game. Yeah, Rush Duel
Yeah.
is just a different game at this point. Sure. Okay.
But with
yeah.
a digital client, you can create cards that create special cards that normally wouldn't be able to do that. Like add
Okay.
like create a card into your hand.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
one
Sure.
thing.
Sure. That's what Duel Links does with skills, sort of, which is kind of cool.
Right.
But the skills are so broken. It's
like this card exists outside of your deck. It is in your pocket. You know what I mean? Like could be
Yeah.
constituted as cheating in real life, but it is it's half of the cost in Duel Links. Yeah.
And that's what Shadowverse and all these other games do. When you summon this card, add a specific spell to your hand. I think adding the random ones are not good. I don't think that's good for a game's health for a competitive aspect. But if it's just like when this card is summoned, add the spell card Upstart Goblin to your hand or something like that.
I
Just
also
silly
think the way
stuff,
Hearthstone
right?
does
doesn't
it
actually break the game.
Yeah, I think the way Hearthstone does it now is extremely good. Which the difference between how they do it now and how they did it back then. So back then, I say, as in like 2014, there were a ton of cards in Hearthstone. It was a new thing. It was an all digital card game, and a bunch of cards they made. They were trying to show off how cool their new digital card game was, where a card would say, do a thing, a random thing, like deal 1 damage to a random enemy, and it would just instantly determine who it was and just shoot a damage. Like, you wouldn't have to slow down the pace of the game by like rolling a die, or figure anything out. It would just do it. Add a random spell from this class to your hand. It would just do it, right? Like it would just like
random
appear in
number
your hand.
generator that you hit this card.
However, as Jeff said, sometimes that's too random. And when it says add a random spell to your hand, and I believe there was a card that its text was literally just add a random spell to both players' hands. There were hundreds of spells in the game, and randomly you would get a random spell out of all 200 in the game, and your opponent would get a random spell out of all 200 in the game. How do you possibly play around that? Like, how do you possibly play around, or your opponent, it's one of those things where like on the one hand, what makes card games fun is the variance. Games do not play out 100% identically every time. Unlike a game like chess, where your pieces start in the same position, and you could theoretically play the same game twice because you could just make the same decisions. Not to say chess is actually extremely interesting. I'm not trying to say that chess is not interesting, but for a card game,
it's interesting for different reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting for different reasons. Yes. For a card game, because both players draw a random number, a random selection of cards from their deck, you will very, very, very frequently have games play out differently just based on that fact. And that's what makes them kind of exciting, is you can play a very small number of games and have the experience be different. So for a card like, I believe the card was called Spellslinger,
Mm.
every single time you play Spellslinger, you get a really different result, obviously.
Yeah, and it
How,
also makes it really hard.
yeah.
Like you could be playing a game and your opponent plays a card, and you're like, I never could have played around that card. I was losing every time,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
feels really bad.
Yeah, yes. That's the problem, is when the randomness overtakes the fun. How they generally do it now is they have a mechanic that I really enjoy, and it's one of the few mechanics they have never rotated out of the game because I think it is the best mechanic they've ever made, called Discover, where it is a keyword where a card will say like, on summon, discover, that's the keyword, and then give you like a criteria. And by criteria, I mean in Yu-Gi-Oh terms, like spellcaster, warrior, fire, pyro, um, like it'll be like discover a warrior. It'll show you 3 warrior monsters, just 3 at random, and you pick one and you add it to your hand. That is too broad for a Yu-Gi-Oh sense, so I'd say maybe it's like
Discover level 2 warriors, and it gives you 3 level 2 warriors, right?
Yes. So for a card like Snake Eye Ash in Hearthstone would not say add a level 1 fire to your hand just from your deck. It would say discover a level 1 fire monster. And there are only, like 20 level 1 fire monsters in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, maybe a little more. Like there are not that many that like do anything, to the point that is how they've solved it's a very small pool, and there is a skill assessment in, you have to pick the one that's best in your situation, and then your opponent is no longer playing around every single spell in the entire game. They're playing around level 1 fires, right? Something like that. I know that it doesn't quite transition perfectly to Yu-Gi-Oh terms.
Yu-Gi-Oh would have to be
that's,
much more specific.
yes,
But yes,
it'll be much more specific. It'll be like level 1 fires with 100 or less, or with 200 defense or something like that, which there are still quite a number of them. Whatever. But yeah, and I think that mechanic is interesting because it makes games play out differently. It is a level of variance that still has a skilled decision involved in pick the best one, right, for your situation and for the matchup and whatever. And because it's specific enough, it's usually not that frustrating. I think that mechanic is very cool. The problem, on the other hand, is when after a format rotation, wow, we talked about that, an hour ago. Sometimes the pool that you pull from is so small, the discover effects get too consistent. Like, for example, there's a deck right now that has the entire deck is based around discovering a demon. And because the format just rotated, there are only like 7 or 8 demons, I think, in the pool at all. And there are like 2 of them that are ridiculous. And you just keep bouncing the cards that discover back to your hand, and you keep playing them, and you discover like 8 copies of this insane crazy card. That's when it goes wrong. When the pool you're pulling from is too small, that you get the crazy high roll one almost every time, and you build your whole strategy around it. But here we are.
But you know what?
You can always add more demons in the next set.
You could, if you don't want to add more demons right now, you can go ahead and you could, just nerf one of those demons, or nerf the demons in general.
Or you can nerf the discover. You can do a bunch of things.
Yeah.
Well, discover as a whole, I don't think you would nerf, because it nerfs then.
Well, they've done that before. They've done that.
The pool that you would rip from, right? Like you would just find some fixes that, like,
Mhm.
you don't have to eliminate the card entirely, but it would.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was, what was it? It was the same thing with the secret deck, right? Like the paladin deck, with how they changed how it would work for the one effect that would gen you a random secret, but if you had 4 up, it would only gen you one that you didn't have, so you'd always like be able to gen the ice block when you would do certain things. Do you remember what I mean?
That was
Ryan?
that was for mage, but yeah, that was, yes.
Oh, mage. Sorry,
Yeah,
that's the one. That's
There was a secret paladin deck, but
Yes.
this is for the mage. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, mage.
They're combining 2 decks together.
I am thinking of the ice block in the mage deck where we were able to set it up in this. Yeah, the secret mage deck. That was the one. Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
And then,
but
like they fix that, right?
They did, yeah, because they make small
ice block
adjustments.
into ice block, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they make and again, that's the advantage of a digital versus a physical game, is when there are only very small changes need to be made. You can do it very quickly. And I guess somehow that naturally transitions into the next thing I want to talk about, which is we've talked about this before vaguely, but now that we've just spent not an hour, I'd say about 40 minutes of our 55 minutes have been about rotation and different ban lists, whatever. How would you feel? So, as we've talked about, Yu Gi Oh! Has done, generally now, they do big sweeping ban lists every 3 months or so. How would you feel if they did more frequent, smaller tweaks?
Yeah, I mean, I think 99% of people would say I'd rather do that. After experiencing Master Duel,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
sure, yeah.
while I don't think Master Duel ban lists
Are
are
perfect,
perfect,
yeah.
half the time they release them and I go, what the hell does this even mean? I don't even understand why
Mm-hmm.
this is a thing.
Yeah.
But for us, I think there are more people on the Konami's R&D that actively play the card game than the people who work on the Master Duel side of things. I am under the impression that people who do who work on Master Duel don't actually play the card game.
They just
They're
look at
people
Yeah.
numbers.
who look at
Yes.
numbers and data and stuff like that,
Yeah.
Sure.
and make decisions that way. Whereas for us, we can look at numbers and data, but they're also card game players to understand more. So they would be able to make these more frequent changes, and be more beneficial, and actually make sense than randomly. I don't know. You play Master. One of you plays Master Duel more than me, but I think this last one hit something super random, right? The last Master Duel list.
Let me double check. But for reference, I asked Jerome this at the World Championships, and I was curious as to what like input TCG R&D would have with any of the Master Duel stuff. And my understanding is like there is input, but final say does come from Japan. Like for the
Yeah, I mean, that
almost
makes
pretty
sense.
much every as is tradition, but like
Yeah.
Japan Master Duel R&D definitive, like no one's tried to veto it, like it is their baby. And yeah, like I agree with Jeff. I think they take a more by the numbers approach and sort of just sit there staring at
Which has pros and
max
cons.
Oh, I don't know.
max
I don't know if
99%
this is
play
random or
rate.
not, but I'm looking at this list, and Performapel Rainbow Magician went to 1, and I was like,
Yeah.
what the hell? I don't
That's
understand.
probably just for the stun decks. That's really frustrating to play against in a best of one format, if I had
Well,
to guess. But
so Ryan won. Well, like Ryan came first in Duelist Cup with Lab, and we were doing the rainbow stuff in Lab because there's like still a good chunk of super heavy, and like it's just like well positioned into other
because if you
decks.
play it Super Samurai, can't play their scales, right? And then they
Yeah,
or no, they can't use their
pretty
monster
much.
effects. I don't remember. Yeah, and then they
They can't
lose.
play at all.
Yeah, they can't play at all. Yeah.
So like to me, this list definitely felt like they looked at the results of the Duelist Cup, they looked at the numbers, they looked at like the win rate, the play rate, and like maybe Rainbow Magician had one of those crazy conversions of like every time this card was on the field,
Opponent
like,
concedes
that
8 seconds later.
yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, so like
Yeah.
that seems like it might be the process of like they saw this card, its win rate versus like play rate versus everything else was just absurd, and they're like, this has to be an oversight. We should probably do something. And then the other hits were also just like quite weird in terms. So you can tell
All I know
feels,
is
like
it's
Jeff
like,
said,
isn't it
like
just
the
like Snake Eye is still basically, some Snake Eye shit is basically the best, but like not even close to any sort of Snake Eye related hits happened, right?
yeah, pretty much. Like actually, I don't know how else to tell you. Yeah, no, they just didn't hit any of it. So like it is the most represented deck, but maybe it is maybe they think it's healthy because the format is still broad enough. Like similar to like current TCG where it's like yes, Snake Eye is like very obviously the best deck, but you will still see this range of like anti Snake Eye decks take the reign. And Duelist Cup definitely skews a lot of this this value when it comes to them building the ban list after the fact. Because I think they're taking a lot of bias that is again by the numbers, not in terms of like actual gameplay. So like I don't know what markers they're using when they look at the numbers after a Duelist Cup to be like, yes, Rainbow Magician to 1, or like Hash Fury. So like so okay, Snake Eye in Master would play 3 copies of Unicorn and 1 copy of Birth, and then the list turned into 2 copies of Unicorn, 2 copies of Birth. And in my head, I think that's actually kind of smart. Like, even if it's just a very minimal approach to something that could be fixed quite easily, like just put Unicorn to 1, like you put Fenrir to 1, like, damn, you're done. But if Unicorn at 3 is only being used in decks that aren't Kashtira, and, you know, Birth is a card that they primarily only want to search with Unicorn, like, this change makes sense to me, while also keeping Kashtira, or like a heavier Kashtira engine as like a possibility. I like this one if we're looking at it solely by the numbers. Like, this makes sense. But then when you look at something like Super Heavy Samurai Wagon 2 or something, and I'm just like, I guess like that is a consistency card. Like, you know, you had to do something, but
I think it's
feels
weird.
like, again, AI is just picking and
Yeah.
choosing as it goes.
Nadir Servant started Master Duel Limited because it was limited in the OCG. Then it slowly went back up to 3, and now it's back to 2. And I don't I can't fathom Nadir Servant was played, but maybe I don't know what deck would have played it, but maybe Lab. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like, what do you call it? Despia also was playing it too.
I guess when you limit Branded Fusion and probably Aliber and every other card, I guess
and they also limited Branded Opening.
And Branded Opening, I guess that's all you have left.
Pretty much.
I guess.
I think they
Right.
Well, anyway, this stemmed from our side of R&D of the TCG being able to make better lists because they are card players. So I would agree. I think that I would prefer having, you know, a list every month and a half that was, you know, a couple cards or something like that. Or maybe 2 months, whatever. Like every 2 months, a smaller list or something like that. But the problem is because we all know it is no secret that everything has to go to Japan, and they take forever to do anything.
Yeah,
so
it would be. That's a little harder when yeah, that's true. Logistically, it's more difficult to coordinate something as quickly.
Maybe to add on to, you know, what we discussed before with stuff like Neuron and stuff that we've seen like post-COVID with online registration and deck list submission. Obviously, there was and has been ways, like, Ryan, you've seen the process of, like, even for paperless, like, those would be, you know,
I'm sure
they would keep track of stuff, but now it's to the point where it's like, you know, everything. A YCS happens using Neuron, that information is available to Japan instantly. What they do with that information, who the fuck knows? Because it seems like they don't use it at all. But, you know, that it is there. This is the equivalent of, like, however many games with Master Duel you have, you know, 10,000 competitors across, you know, a whole region using this app. So you should have no excuses by the numbers.
Deck lists were always paper. When deck lists were always paper, I judged a lot of regionals, and I was on the deck check team for YCS in like almost 10 years ago at this point. And yeah, when the deck lists were paper, we would literally just alphabetize all the deck lists and have them in a little like box. And then when we did deck checks, we would just pull out the folder of that person's name alphabetically and like flip through and like find their paper deck list. And it's like, it's crazy to think that like that's how they did it for like 15 years. You know, we just
even for like archetype stuff, right? Like related to
I mean, I imagine
guess,
now
like,
since it's all online.
Like
since it's all online, I imagine now they just, you know, it's super easy. Like, it's just all submitted online anyway. I do not know how they did that before, because I didn't go through and check and count how many of which archetype. you know, like at YCS Columbus, the 2015, I did physically sort a lot of the like I physically alphabetized. I'm even going to go as far as say most of the deck lists. But, you know, I didn't check for archetype or anything like that. Like, that wasn't my job, and to the best of my knowledge, it didn't happen at the tournament. But I'm sure now that it's on the I'm sure now that everything is submitted digitally, it's way easier. And when we transition to Neuron, so Europe has already pretty much full. I guess we'll talk about this now, because there was an announcement today at time of recording that in Europe, at least, Konami card game IDs are being mixed into Neuron, and like Konami card game IDs on their own are being phased out, and you must have a Neuron linked account. So presumably everything will be done through Neuron in Europe moving forward, presumably, based on the information that we have at this time. Based on the one announcement we've had at this time, that is what it seems like. So, if that is the case for all regions eventually moving forward, I imagine they will have a much, much, much easier time gathering any information. Like, in just hypothetically, in a year, if every region is only submitting on Neuron, I imagine they have a system where they can just look at deck lists and they can, probably, like, they'll have all the data they need, right? Where everyone's deck list will be submitted and they can figure out which cards are doing well, which cards are not, which cards are highly played but not doing well. I think that's something that's kind of overlooked is if a bunch of people like are entering with specific cards in their deck and not doing well, or if a bunch of people are playing the same deck, but only people playing specific cards are the ones that are doing better, that is something to think about as well, which I think is kind of underutilized in their current, probably underutilized. To be fair, I don't know how to look at their data right now, but I imagine it's not that easy to comb through it, and will be easier and they'll be more informed with, Neuron going forward if that is the case. But okay, we really strayed into like Master Duel and Neuron, and I'm trying to figure out what we were even. What were we even on about 6 minutes ago? What were we even talking about?
RNG
right.
ban.
Okay.
You were asking whether or not we would prefer like
right. Okay.
Shorter periods in between a ban list. So let's say instead of going from like the 4 months, we go to the monthly or the bi-monthly, stuff like whatever. So like let's think about it, right? So like what do you think? Would you even accept them saying the trope that I did? No, so yeah, accept it. So like I think this has happened once where it's just like there are no changes. Right? Would you accept something like that, or do you expect to change every single time? Like, when are we truly like happy with where Yu-Gi-Oh is at? Because I feel like someone's always going to be complaining, and like there's always going to be this blatant power creep, like tier 1 deck in some capacity. Like, would you accept them?
I mean, yeah, I think no, it would be okay. I mean, if there was every 2 months there's not going to be any changes, and but I think it'd be very easy like to look at this from it and go like, oh, maybe like this summon limit anti-spell crap really is a problem, and just go, all right, here's 2 months into the format, these cards are limited to 1, keep playing Yu-Gi-Oh.
Sure.
And
yeah, I think that's I kind of feel the same way. If, again, I know it's so like we're so far removed from the regularly scheduled 6-month ban list cycle, which in hindsight, terrible system. Like, in hindsight, terrible, awful system to have had only 2 ban lists a year, 6 months apart, on the same days, regardless of product cycle, regardless of any other outside factors, regardless of anything. That was not a good system. It was cool that it was consistent, so like you could buy your cards and your cards are safe for 6 months, whatever. But I think that system is worse than the what we have now. However, obviously our system now is not perfect. I would probably we would have, like, in my ideal world, there would be a hard date of a ban list. Again, I don't know the exact amount of time, but I would say maybe like 3 or 4 months. It would depend on the product cycle, I think. I think it would fluctuate between 3 and 5 months depending on the product schedule in those coming months. And then at the halfway point, there would be a soft date where if changes were necessary or smaller changes would be expected. So, for example, our list, when did this list go into effect? Was it January 1st? Was that when this list went into effect? Or was it a little bit... I'm actually, hold on, let me find when which, if it did, it's actually been longer than I thought for not having a list, if this really went into effect January 1st, but I feel like it might have. Yeah, it went into effect January 1st. So let's say this list goes into effect January 1st. And you see, okay, there are no products coming out until mid-February. There are no events until mid-February. Let's have a new list May 1st. But in March, there will be the small adjustments list where we look at the events in the first half of the format, see if there are any outliers that need to be addressed, which in this case, I would say the outliers are Summon Limit and arguably Anti-Spell, but mostly Summon Limit. I would say Summon Limit, in my opinion, is the outlier of the current format. I think that card is extremely not fun. It has been not fun for a long time. And wow, shocker, the first format where we have there can be only one Rivalry Warlords, one goes in match. Summon Limit is never in side deck. Weird. But I would say that would be how I, as a player, would like it. I understand there are logistical issues with, how it works, and that maybe isn't possible, but that would be my like ideal situation of like halfway through. Okay, we see there are some, we see there are some cards that are, not fun to play against, and we'll get rid of those. And then, as Jeff said, yeah, just keep playing the rest of the format. Like, you're not expecting any engines to be hit in the first half. Just these outlier tech cards that just kind of make the game not enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think we definitely hit the nail on the head with this.
I can't disagree with that, Ryan, whatsoever. I think legitimately. I think like that is the only solve is just like having your finger on the pulse the entire time, because just neglecting stuff like this isn't conducive to good gameplay. We're just at this weird point where it's like you're waiting for a ban list out of virtue, but like you could just incrementally hit these problem cards as you go instead of just one big list. Why ruin the experience for everyone in between?
Which I think this is something that I don't know if we've ever talked about this actually. It's possible at this point, but something that I've felt a number of times. There have been really, really, really good formats soured by a very small amount of cards.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I wish there would be more lists like that, where instead of these big sweeping changes, we just eliminate outlier cards that make things really not fun, which I'll give some examples. So, like, one of the best lists of all time, in my opinion, is actually the list in 2015 after the WCQ, where they didn't get rid of every deck. The format was really, really fun. They just banned Jhin and gave a couple decks really small, tiny, tiny hits. But they banned Jhin, the main outlier card of the format, the main not fun card of the format. And I think that was a great decision. Everybody liked all the decks. Just Jhin was extremely not fun. I think it was like they banned Jhin, they limited Shurit, and that might have been it of any things that I even like remember happening. And it's it was a very small list, and it was one of my favorites. And then I think now we've talked about playing Edison a couple times. Going back in hindsight, there are a couple cards like Trap Dust Shoot and probably Dark Arm Dragon and Deck Devi that I think the games where those cards are involved are completely different and completely turned on their head compared to the other games, to the point that you're barely even playing the same format. And it's just not fun. I think in 2017 Spiral, I love that format. And if somebody drew Gofu, Maxi, or 1-for-1, all limited to 1 cards, it was instantly not fun anymore. Like, it was a very, like, the format was very, like, slow and, like, interactive until somebody had Maxi, Gofu, or 1-for-1. And then those cards just did things that the rest of the format didn't do, right? Like, most of the format was based on 2-card interactions, and then suddenly, Gofu, okay, if you don't have Maxi for my Gofu, I'm killing 3 of your cards. Or if you have Maxi for my Gofu, you're drawing 2, and now I lose instantly. And it's just like these really like weird interactions. And yeah, I'd say Summon Limit's probably the one this format where Summon Limit is just. Is there anything else right now that you feel the same way about, or is it truly just Summon Limit? Is it just turning into the Summon Limit hate cast? Like day 100 of me asking someone to get banned.
I feel like there might be another one. Let's see.
I know as a whole you don't like Crossout, but I don't know if you feel like Crossout is like really that bad relative.
Oh,
like right now.
I feel I want to say Tactics, but I feel
Sure,
like
Tactics is, I feel like, is a very polarizing card because it's crazy. I think half the people swear Tactics is the best card in the format. Half the people swear Tactics sucks right now, which is
yeah,
crazy,
because the people that swear it's the best like get to resolve it.
Yes,
and then the
people that swear it's
that
the
hate
worst
it,
never draw it or always brick on it, and
well,
because sometimes
they get impumped and pass because Tactics is replacing another card. Like that can and will just happen.
Yeah.
Or like
Yeah.
you draw it into like a, you know what I mean? Like there's other like layers to it, but I feel like
no, but
Tactics is on par of like those sort of like ignorant cards where
yes,
boy am I upset when my opponent draws it in certain spots. Like I could argue that Summon Limit, my opponent will draw it in some spots and it'll just be unplayable, right?
Yeah.
Like it goes either way. But
Yeah.
I think Tactics is definitely one of, like you said, very polarizing in terms of gameplay. Because like when the game is good and like there are effects on board, like I feel like a card like Tactics is pretty good. Like the slowish sort of thing. Like Tactics had no applications into Eldritch, but like what did Tactics do into like people leaving like a Mechabar on the field or something? You know, if we go back to when Tactics was first introduced into the game, like that was where we were at. Like Tactics in the Dragon Mirror matches or something where like the slow back and forth Tyrannic Field bouncing a card or something. Like that's where I think Tactics is really, really good for the game. But when I think we get into the realm where we're at now, where it's like summon guy, do something, get hand trapped. Oh, Tactics, look at your hand, continue to do something.
I think
then
if Tactics didn't have that look at hand effect,
yeah,
it would be a fantastic, like like, I know that's crazy to say. If Tactics didn't do what it does, it would be a more healthy card. Exactly. Obviously, this has 3 effects that are all good. If it didn't have one of them,
thing with like,
you know,
looking at Summon Limit though, right? Like Summon Limit is the marker of like, again, only used for evil.
Yeah.
Because when the game is good, I don't think a card like Summon Limit is playable, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that we're seeing that traditionally, where like, oh, this Summon Limit card is just like unusable garbage, and like that was the case for many a year.
It would still be frustrating, but also I think if it was like, even if it had like an effect similar to like randomly shuffle an opponent's card back into the deck.
Yeah, not looking like, at their hand is so crazy. Looking at their hand is so crazy.
Knowing that like if you stop one card on their next turn, their turn is over, and that because like before you would like to think like, oh, like I can like maybe I want to save this imperm for something, but now you know like the first thing they summon, you just imperm it, and their turn is 99% over, right? And it's just it's super stupid. Yeah, like if you still wanted to have some sort of forceful sentry effect, you just shuffle
such a funny card.
Card back into the deck.
Yeah, actually,
it would still be frustrating because sometimes they would hit like the best card in your hand, but like it's definitely like at least they don't see your hand and have perfect knowledge, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because like even then it's like not necessarily hitting like the best. Well, sorry, it is hitting the best card, but it's like when you aren't continuing playing. And you do activate Tactics in some of those instances, like you are just taking the one copy of Ash and leaving them with like all these other hand traps or something, right? And then you're just stopping them from doing anything on the following turn. So I think maybe adding the random element does sort of compensate for both sides, where sometimes it will just hit the hand trap anyway, in which case, all right, bad luck. Like Snake Eye's already powerful, probably play through 2 hand traps, fine. But then, on top of that, like maybe it'll random generate, hit the engine card and keep the second hand trap and then keep another engine card. Like that's probably the only balancing that I can make sense of when I think of a card like that, for sure. Obviously it not existing is the other balancing, but if we want to keep it around, people just complain about the random elements. Like, damn, dude, Tactics took my second hand trap. Like,
they would. If the card should have just been called like double
tactics. Double tactics town.
Double tactics delights or something. I don't know.
To be fair, if you think about thrust, there's nothing triple about it, right? You either set it or you add it to your hand.
That's true.
There's really nothing else to it. Probably should have just called it double.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. I don't know. That's I think that covers most.
But as for there is one card. The more I thought about it, that I thought is kind of on the level.
Yes.
It'd be like a step down for me from Summon Limit.
Sure.
Summon Limit is like every deck can just use it. Literally every of my locals, every time I look on the field, I walk by.
Summon Limit, yeah. Because why wouldn't you? I'm going for Summon Limit to my deck, I guess. Hopefully I draw it and you lose. Great. It's just emptiness. Like that's what.
Yeah.
Like how many times do we have to ban how many times do we have to ban Imperial Order, branded empty, Vanny's Emptiness? How many times do we have to ban this card? Royal Oppression, like we banned it. We've banned this card 4 times. Ugh.
But the next card for me is just, honestly, it's a hand trap. Can you guess what it is?
Oh, Dogwood? Maybe?
Shifter.
Oh, Shifter. Oh, that's a...
Dogwood.
Hey, that card I hate also. Yeah, Shifter is still...
It is a card that,
yeah,
so people will be like, well, if it didn't exist, these dexterous people do whatever they want. I'm
people
like,
still do it.
yes,
it's the same as
so it's one of those things, like, just because the deck can do whatever it wants does not mean it's a healthy card. It just means there are just 2 unhealthy things going on. Like, the Snake Eye deck should not be doing what it does, and Shifter should not be doing what it does. The 2 things can be both the same, like,
yes,
both
2 things can be bad
at the same time.
yes. 2
it's
things
not
can
one
be
or the
bad.
other. Like, whenever we, like, Shifter gets brought up in my local scene, there's always a guy like, well, you just don't want to get Shifted and lose. I'm like, yeah,
yes,
but also...
you're right. You know what? I don't.
You're creating a game that is like, you're just creating a non-game with 1 card.
Yeah. And then what happens when 2 people with Shifter play against each other? Then the person that draws Shifter is just down a card, and then you lose, which is like, I understand that's supposed to be like that's the cost benefit of running Shifter, is if you both have Shifter decks, then you're both at a disadvantage. It's like, shut up.
Right, and it's like not even like a thing shutting off like the broken decks. It also shuts down basically 90% of decks that are fair. Like, my friend was just playing like Marine Cess, and he got Shifter, and that's a deck that summons 1 monster and passes. Like,
that's kind of that is my argument. Like, that will be my argument against Maxi till the end of time. When somebody says, well, without Maxi, the decks are too crazy. That's why OCG is something. And I go,
it
well,
doesn't just punish those decks. It
punishes every deck. And it's kind of, I don't feel this way about Nibiru really, but I still think
I feel
in
that
hindsight,
way about Nibiru, but
it is hilarious that, like, Salamangreat is the most mid deck.
Yeah.
Salamangreat is the most mid deck of all time. It is the most deck of all time. It is just so average. And I never once have played against Salamangreat and thought to myself, oh my god, this is so unfair. Oh my god, this is so Salamangreat is literally just, my opponent is playing monster cards. My opponent's playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm also playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That is all Salamangreat is. And I think it is so funny that Nibiru was better against Salamangreat than the actual combo decks of the, like, it is so funny.
Yeah.
It is. Maxi's probably better against Salamangreat than any of the like they summon like 7 times to make a Sunlight Wolf. Like, because that's just how cards are designed now. Like, nothing Salamangreat is not FTKing you. Nothing Salamangreat did in 2018 was like crazy.
There was no
2019 was crazy oppressive.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah,
right?
It was just making a guy and getting a trap, and it's like,
make guy, add hand, trap, add hand guy from graveyard, and turn Nibiru. All right.
And I think it's so funny how, like, there are these decks that just fold to these cards that are not, and like, again, similarly, like, Shifter just destroys half of these decks that are not even good, and that's the problem, I guess, with a bunch of these cards. Like, Summon Limit also just invalidate. Like, your opponent's deck doesn't have to be good for it to lose to Summon Limit. I'd actually argue the worse their deck is, the harder it also still loses to Summon Limit. But, like, and that's why these cards are, oh god, I don't know. Maybe it's just because, like, I'm just looking at this ban list from 3 months ago, and looking at all these changes and looking at all of these things and thinking about, in hindsight, none of these changes did anything, because we all knew these fire decks were coming out, and it just doesn't. I don't know. I think my opinion on this will, like, I'm at kind of like a I guess, actually no, they banned Kubik and Nagito. That was I love them for that. That was
pretty
great.
Big deals.
That was great. I love them for that. I got to give them credit for that. That's insane. I hate those cards, actually, more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like,
and they banned one of your most hated cards.
Which one is that?
Isolde.
I don't hate Isolde that much. I kind of hate Isolde. I don't like it.
I feel like anytime it's come up, you've actually yelled about it. If we go back and listen.
It's just, I actually hate Phoenix Blade more than Isolde, but I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this outcome also. I hate Phoenix Blade a lot, but it's okay. I don't know. I didn't actually even want this to devolve to even mention the current Forbidden Limited list when I want to talk about this topic, and somehow here we are. We've
I feel like it kind of has to when you're talking
Yeah.
about ban list and rotations.
I guess that's true. Yeah, well, yeah, I was trying. Yeah, but I didn't want to talk about like the specific instances. I don't know. It's just it's okay. This is, although I guess to be fair, this is probably how we have felt 3 months into every format of all time. 3 months,
Forever.
like maybe with like
I am
2
signed
exceptions.
up for this YCS, and I do not want to go.
Because I want
my
new
flights
stuff.
booked,
Yeah.
and I yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah. I'm more excited for a regional I have next month, and I had a regional this weekend that was 20 minutes away from me. I didn't go to bed. I wasn't going to that.
Yeah.
People, that was crazy. But I'm more excited for a regional I have next month because the new set is out, and there'll probably be a forbidden list. So I'll like, maybe get to try something cool and have
Yeah.
fun. But
Yeah.
now I'm flying to a crap city to play a boring format, and here we are.
Yep. Man, anybody listening to this must think we hate Yu-Gi-Oh! This is crazy. Like,
all of us
all you
definitely
guys
hate
do
Yu-Gi-Oh!
is say Yu-Gi-Oh! Is boring. You're
I
like,
do.
yeah.
Every time. I'll enjoy it at some point. Don't you worry. When I'm back, once this depression is gone, it's all over for you too.
These guys hate games. All they do is complain about
Brian
them.
and I specifically like the 2 weeks of when a new set comes out and a new format starts, and then hate it after that.
Yeah, I like the first event, and that's it.
Yes.
I guess.
Yes, I like when not all the decks are refined from 20 hours a day play on Dueling Book, and I can actually have a little bit of fun with random stuff.
Win Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, feel nothing. Lose Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, world is ending. All right, I think we should probably stop it at that before we get too deep. But
Okay.
No more tangents.
Yeah, I guess. Was there anything else to?
No, I think it's up. I just want to mention that I have a video that's being edited right now about a new game that's coming out. So if you want to hear me talk about that, that'll probably also be up this week sometime. Called Alestrals, and I just talked about that game for a little bit. So look out for that.
Yeah. And then I guess, when is Raleigh? Raleigh is in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And then we can. God, if there's not a list after Raleigh, I have no idea what we're going to talk about.
They'll announce it during the YCS.
That would be cool. They've done that before.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, that would actually be insane if they just if they do that, like, again, that would be so crazy. I would love that. But yeah, so if there's not a list after Raleigh, I legitimately do not know what we will possibly talk about or when we will do another one of these.
Well, we can't talk about something. So at Raleigh is the new set.
Oh, we'll probably, okay. You know what?
So
You're
we'll be
right.
able to talk about probably the new cards that come out in that, some world premiere cards and stuff.
We should probably, we'll probably do that video before Raleigh then, even, actually.
And
once
so
we know. Card.
So with that, it means that we will should be getting, I think, release info this week, because next week is the sneak peek.
No, the sneak peek is the week of Raleigh.
Right, which is the 20th, right?
Oh, yes.
So which would be next week. So this week sometime, I feel like we should be getting information. And I'm surprised today on Monday they didn't release the video of.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Of all the
Legacy
stuff,
of Destruction.
Of all the guys.
It's like, hey, check out this week on all your favorite content creators. Maybe they're a little behind. I don't know. Maybe they'll do it next week. Usually it's the week before the sneak peek, but maybe we'll just do it the week of the sneak peek. So
all right, I lied. Definitively, next week there will be an episode about Legacy Destruction.
Yeah,
we will. Yeah, so that's gonna happen. All right, that's all I got. I don't know if either of you have a closing thought.
I'm good.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all for listening. This one was barely even about Yu-Gi-Oh! I guess at the end it kind of was, but I hope anyone thought anything was interesting about anything we talked about. If you have played other games that have other formats, other forms of rotation or ban lists or whatever, or if you've just played a game that you like how your game handles it, or if you just play Yu-Gi-Oh! And you heard us discuss anything about rotation that's interesting at all, let us know in the comments on what you think about literally any of that.
I mean, it's got to be more interesting than talking about fighter format.
Sure, yeah, because I am fascinated if anyone heard what we said about how we would handle any of these things. How would anyone else handle it? I'm always interested to see other people's opinions. Because I think we've been playing these games for over a decade and have almost 20 years for some of us that like our opinions are so jaded at this point. There are definitely a million things I haven't considered, and I'm always interested in listening to what newer players, how they felt, like having not lived in the literal trenches of the before times when nothing was good. Like how do they feel about how all this is handled? But thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
Adios.
Yeah.